Well, hello, my lovelies. Today we're going to be talking to Scott Schara, whose 19-year-old daughter died because of hospital protocol right after this. Hey, guys. So as promised, we have Scott Schara here. Scott, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks for having me, Elsa.
I'm honored to have you here, and I'm sorry it's such a difficult topic. I'd like to, if it's okay with you, I'd like to learn more about Grace, and I want to give you plenty of time to talk about what happened to her, but let's talk about Grace's life a little bit if we could.
Sure, that's my favorite topic with these interviews. So I'll just because we talked off camera a little bit about your producer's hair, we'll just get into that right away because Grace, you probably noticed my hair color, so she would call that the color of wisdom. And Grace just saw everything through the right lens. She was Down syndrome. She was 19 when she died, but she was very high functioning. She was a comic, so that's why when you mentioned about hair, I thought, oh boy, yeah, I'll start with that. I've never told this on the air yet. She just on her comic side,
Mhm.
she made up her own jokes, and she would tell jokes regularly, but she made up her own jokes, and one of them that was, I think, a classic. We were deer hunting together, and we were just in the stand waiting, and she whispered, "Dad, I have a joke." And I said, "Well, what's your joke?" And she said, "Where do bees go to the bathroom?" I said, I don't know. Where do they go to the bathroom?" And she said, "The BP station." So she got stuff. She was a sharp kid. My
Yeah,
wife taught
very.
her. Yeah, it was neat. My wife taught her to read and write. I taught her how to drive a car, and she just she brought a joy that you can't make up. If you go back to the beginning, Cindy and I were, my wife's name is Cindy. We were 39 years old when we had Grace, and we had decided to let God lead in that department. We hadn't had a child for 12 years and just thought, I wonder if he wants us to have another one. And he blessed us with Grace. And we named her Grace after God's grace. And when she learned that we named her after God's grace, she would proudly say to people, I was named after one of God's principles. And she got that. She had a relationship with our Lord that is admirable. She called me earthly dad. That just gives you a perspective. And we just had a great time. Our life was blessed. I have to, you frame this and think, well, what the heck is going on here? And you just have to frame it that God's sovereign, and he had Grace on loan to us for 19 years, and we were blessed. And for some reason, he chose to take her home. And I don't know exactly why, but right now it seems that he is behind us getting the story out to save lives. Um, Grace, she was in choir. She played violin at my daughter Jessica's wedding. She had a love for Elvis Presley. I mean, stuff would happen with Grace that you just think, how did this happen? And so she wrote a fan letter to Priscilla Presley, Elvis's wife, to Graceland, and Priscilla called Grace on the phone and invited us to Graceland to meet with her. So we got a private meeting with Priscilla Presley and Graceland, and that's on Grace's website. It shows a little bit of that meeting in a cute video I took of her and Priscilla. Uh, it just
That's just amazing to me. That's incredible. And I have to put a personal note in there that Grace has my heart right away because I too am a huge Elvis fan. So I think she and I would have got on swimmingly with
yeah.
that. We would have talked Elvis for hours on end, I'm sure. Um, I love so much your faith and your perspective on that because so many people, when horrible things happen, things that you can't justify or explain, like Grace's death, so many people will rail against God and blame God. And I think what you are doing and what your family has done is really what you're meant to do. You're supposed to just be in God's grace, and accept His love and trust in Him. And it it has to be so unfathomable that she's gone, of course. Um, Tell me, if you will, walk us through what happened.
So I'll go through a kind of a rushed version of it just because I would like to leave time for questions. And everything that I'm saying has been elaborated on Grace's website. And the reason is because as I started telling the story originally, we realized that there's a believability factor to the story because somebody who doesn't know me would think this is too far out there. This could not have happened. And the story has been refined through personal research. I have about 500 hours of research into Grace's case, and I'm a very analytical type person. And so when I started drilling this down, researching the records, and we had a doctor that helped us go through them to make sense out of the records, because some of the words I couldn't even pronounce, but now I understand them. So anyway, we posted all this on the website because I want people to not just believe me. Go look, because I took the information that's on the website right out of the records that we requested from the hospital. So I'll start going into the story. Grace went into the hospital with COVID, but not. It was a specific situation, and so we were on the frontline doctor's protocol. We really never expected to go into the hospital, but Grace and I both ended up in the hospital. 3 days after she died, I ended up in the hospital with symptoms even worse than hers, and we found out that even though we were on the frontline doctor's protocol, I have a genetic disposition to clot and produce inflammation, which exacerbates the issue with COVID. And so neither one of us could maintain our oxygen. So my suspicion is Grace inherited that genetic disposition from me. And so we both ended up in the hospital. My wife's symptoms were actually worse, but she was able to maintain her oxygen in the high 90s, the mid to high 90s the whole time. And when I went into the hospital, I was at 84%, and Grace was at 88, 89%. So we went into the emergency room, and one of the take homes is that if I would have known then what I know now, we would have never checked into the hospital. We would have went to the emergency room and went home with a prescription for oxygen and a steroid. And if we would have done that, Grace would be alive today. And I'm 100% confident in that because I went to a different hospital and they saved my life. I was in worse shape than Grace, probably 3 times worse. But they followed a different protocol. They had not bought into the government agenda that's designed to take people out. So anyway, I just thought it was going to be, I was, unsuspecting. Just thought it's going to be a mini vacation, just to goof off with Grace. And the first day it was like that. We just had fun. We ordered off the menu. The second day was the first request for a ventilator, and we got educated on ventilators pretty fast. And they push ventilators on people. The ventilator paradigm in our country, unfortunately, is still based on when COVID first was announced that we have a ventilator shortage, and it seemed like that's the silver bullet, and it's not the silver bullet. And so I got educated pretty quick, and we denied the push to put Grace on a ventilator 5 different times. And Grace was never close to a ventilator patient. They wanted us to make this decision so that they had it in their back pocket. So they called it just in case. Well, just in case to them is based on their financial desires. So anyway, the really the interesting thing happened the next day, which was their oxygen recording equipment is faulty. And what happened was, as I ordered food, this was on October 9th. Grace checked in the hospital. Our first day was October 7th. On October 9th, we I started feeding Grace, and the nurse came running in and said, "You can't do that." And I said, "What's the reason?" And she said, "Grace's oxygen is only at 85%. And I suspected I would get COVID while I was in the hospital. So I had my own oxygen meter. So I put it on Grace's finger, and it read 95%. And I asked the nurse if our meter was accurate, and she said yes. And so I challenged, why is theirs not? And she said the leads get sweaty. So of course I pressed that further, and um, she she said that, I asked, why don't the leads get changed out every 3 or 4 hours then, given this is the primary tool you're having to measure or to recommend treatment for my daughter? And she snottily responded, you should just be thankful you caught this. So anyway, we were wise then to the oxygen situation. And, for anybody watching this, you think, well, what would be the motivation for the hospital to have faulty oxygen equipment? Well, it's a way they can justify a ventilator. We were in the room, which makes our case very unique outside of all the other unique things. Most people find out their loved one died after the fact, not while they're in the room, and then they start looking at the details. They find out Uncle Joe was on a ventilator, and then the hospital justifies the ventilator because of arbitrarily low oxygen numbers. Anyway, moving on, because I want to get to Grace's last day, because that's the most important piece. I was taken out by an armed guard on Sunday morning, the 10th. Um, it took us 44 hours to negotiate with Grace. Grace's special needs attorney negotiated with the hospital attorney to get my daughter Jessica in as a replacement advocate. My wife had COVID, so she couldn't be the replacement. And anyway, then we go to Grace's last day. I want to dive right into that. That was October 13th. That morning, the doctor called Cindy and I at home and wanted a decision for the fifth time about this pre-authorization for a ventilator. We said no. And he said, well, Grace had such a good day yesterday that I think we should put a feeding tube in. So we approved that. She was malnutrition because they wouldn't let me feed her. They wouldn't let Jess feed her. And the nurses only gave her a few protein shakes. That's sickening. Anyway, they demand Grace or Jessica wanted to go home and take a shower, and or not go home. She was gonna. She said she wants to take a shower. When I was in the room, they said you can't leave the room. There's a shower in the room. That morning, they insisted Jessica go home to take a shower. So she did. She came back and overheard two doctors and a nurse say that they had to restrain Grace. So she asked why. Restraining means strapped down to a bed, and they said because she wanted to get out of bed to go to the bathroom. This is just sickening. So they strapped my buddy, my best buddy, down to the bed for wanting to go to the bathroom. An attorney friend that we're working with asked me, Scott, do you think that you would have been strapped down to the bed? And I said, no, I would have never been strapped down to the bed. So that got me thinking about the fact that I wonder if they did this because she has Down syndrome. So I researched the records one more time, looking for Down syndrome. And in the 22 doctors' reports that were written over the 7 days that Grace was in the hospital, they referenced the fact that she has Down syndrome 36 times. That doesn't make any sense. That would be like if I'm in the hospital, they write down white male. Do they need to reference that 36 more times, or just is once enough? So now Grace's numbers start. She's frustrated a little bit with being strapped down, so they sedate her more. She had been on a sedation med called Precedex for 4 full days prior. That's illegal. Precedex package insert, which is the rules the hospital is supposed to follow, says to use for no more than 24 hours. They took that opportunity to ratchet up the Precedex further. Then, instead of waiting for Grace's numbers to rebound, which one of the nurses challenged the head ICU nurse, which was a 14-year ICU nurse. She challenged her to wait. She said, no, we're going to put the feeding tube in. They used that as an excuse to ratchet up the Precedex to max dose. This was at 10:48 in the morning on Grace's last day. Now she's out of it. Even though she's out of it, they still gave her 3 doses of Lorazepam, which is an anxiety med. So starting at 5:46, they gave her the second dose of Lorazepam. 3 minutes later, another dose. And then at 6:15, a 2 milligram dose of morphine as an IV push. So in a 29-minute window, she has max dose Precedex, 2 doses of Lorazepam, and morphine. Elsa, you and I could not have survived that. We have an intensivist who wrote me on January 29th. An intensivist is a doctor who is a specialist in med combinations. And he said, Scott, the meds killed your daughter. The doctor who helped us review the records originally, when we didn't know anything about hospital records, she concluded this is so bad, she called it intentional. The package insert for morphine says to not combine those drugs. It's in a black box warning on the front page of the package insert. Furthermore,
Wow.
it says that they're supposed to monitor the patient and have the reversal drug bedside. They did neither of those. In fact, after 6:15, when the morphine dose was delivered, my daughter Jessica realized Grace was getting cold. She asked the head ICU nurse to come in and take a temperature, and she said, "No, that's normal," and just told Jessica to use a blanket. I mean, it's only normal if you're trying to kill somebody. So at 7:20, Jessica calls us 7:20 p.m., panicking that Grace's numbers are dropping. And Cindy and I are on a FaceTime call with Jessica. And so we said, get the nurses in. She said, Dad, I can't. They will not come in. She estimated 30 nurses outside the room at that particular time because of the shift change. So Cindy and I start screaming, save our daughter. They holler back to us, she's DNR, which is do not resuscitate. We found out in researching the records, the doctor put a DNR order on Grace 8 minutes after they maxed out the Precedex dose, which was at 10:48. He put a DNR order on her at 10:56. That's illegal. So we hollered back to the nurses, she's not DNR, save our daughter. They would not come in the room. That's also illegal because a power of attorney or patient's wishes to override a DNR order trumps the order.
Hmm.
So we watched Grace die at 7:27 on FaceTime. After the fact, Jessica told us there was an armed guard posted outside the room. And just if people are wondering, was that just a coincidence? It's no coincidence at all. Jessica climbed in bed with Grace after she died to hold her. Well, actually, after she statistically died, and
Hmm.
the I'll come back to that. The armed guard stood outside the nurse's window and watched her the entire 20 minutes she laid with Grace. We found out through a medical malpractice nurse there was a window they could have still revived her after she flatlined. But they chose to not even come in that room. How we got wise to all of this is after Cindy and Jess cleaned Grace up and met our pastor there and the funeral director, the pastor was walking Cindy out in a wheelchair, and one of the nurses had Grace's belongings on a cart and leaned down and said to Cindy, me and several of the other nurses don't think Grace should have died today. And that opened up this whole, path that we're on right now. So that's the short version of the story, Elsa.
Scott, I'm so blown away. I'm horrified. I'm angered. And I think anyone who hears this story just has to feel the same way. I cannot wrap my brain around that this happened in an American hospital in this day and age, that something like this could happen. Um, the lack of humanity and compassion, obviously professionalism and ethical practices is first and foremost. The image of that I have in my mind of these nurses, these professionals who are, meant to save people and help people, standing around and not helping. My heart breaks for you and your wife and your daughter for uh, probably feeling so incredibly helpless in those moments. The rage I feel on your behalf is insane right now. Tell me, tell me the aftermath of that. Like, walk me through. So you said that the nurses, some of the nurses told you that this isn't right, what happened here. How did that set this chain in motion for you to get all of this information? How on earth did you get this information?
Well, that's a fantastic question. I mean, hardly anybody asked that, but it was quite a situation. So I ended up in the hospital 3 days after Grace died, and so then I'm laying there, I'm processing. I wrote a little obituary, the start of one. My wife ended up writing Grace's obituary, but you start processing what's going on, and then I'm treated completely different. And God used that time for me to forgive the doctor and nurse so that I could be more objective instead of just approaching this as an angry dad. And so then Grace's funeral happened, and now I was pretty weak. I was on oxygen a couple months after getting out of the hospital, but the nurse or the doctor friend that was helping said, Scott, you got to get the records. So on October 30th, I did a records request, and God was behind this. I mean, you can't make this up. So I mailed it in because that's their process. I called 3 days later, asked, "Did you receive my request?" And she said, "No, we haven't received the request." She said, "But I haven't looked at today's mail." So I said, I'll just hold. Why don't you look?" So she said, "Yeah, I have it here." So I said, "What's the process?" And she said, "Well, now it takes 3 to 4 weeks. We accumulate the records and get them to you." I said, "Boy, I don't have 3 to 4 weeks. We really have to get on this and see what's going on." And I said, "Is there another way?" And she said, "Yeah, we can email them to you." I said, "What do we got to do?" And she said, "Well, I need you to send in your email address." I said, "Can I fax it? We have a fax machine at the house." And she said, "Yes." And so she gave me the fax number. I stayed on the phone with her the whole time to make sure she got the fax, she could read my email, and she got the records to us that day. So then we started perusing the records. And after a couple of days of review with the doctor, we realized they killed her. So then the obligation became, we've got to share this with the hospital, thinking that's our biblical responsibility. So I wrote a 15-page letter. My daughter wrote a 9-page letter, which I had started mine early on in the process after I got kicked out. That just, I'd like to just document things. Anyway, then we attached all of our research, and we sent this all to patient relations and requested a meeting on November 8th. So my belief with a meeting is you want to have somebody be prepared. So we gave them everything. And on December 2nd, they sent back an email saying, "We are not going to meet with you." So my sense was God was opening the door to share the story. And so I wrote a complaint letter to the department that regulates physicians and the department that regulates hospitals. And I sent a short couple of paragraphs to Newsmax and Fox. And shockingly, Newsmax got a hold of me a week later and asked me to be on national TV. And that's how this whole thing started rolling. You can't, it's
Incredible.
hard to grasp.
Scott, has the hospital tried to stop you in any way from talking about this? Have they had any further communication with you at all, with your family about this?
Only that they wrote us a letter dated December 15th that we received on Christmas Eve that was responding to that request that we had asked on November 8th. And basically, it was a letter that denied every single thing that we put in. But I mean, this case has gotten so much traction, and it's all crickets. They haven't, I would love it if they would contact us, but for some reason, they're not contacting us. We even have billboards up. We bought 13 billboards calling this out. And even
Wow.
with all that, the national press that we've gotten, nothing from the hospital.
That's amazing to me that they can just stick their head in the sand and act like nothing is happening whatsoever when you have, this insurmountable proof of it all. I mean, you have their own documentation of what was done. It's just this whole story is just so incredible. And, what makes it even more scary is that it probably is happening across the country. This is probably not the only place because and please correct me if I'm wrong if you know the answer to this. My understanding is that with COVID deaths that were listed as COVID deaths, hospitals get more funding. They get more money for that. So this sounds like a hospital, it almost sounds like a hospital operating out of like third world conditions that their, equipment doesn't work. Their practices are, arcane. So this sounds like almost like a money grab that these hospitals are doing. Is that
Well,
accurate to say?
that's very accurate. And on Grace's website, God got me up at 3 o'clock one morning, and I have this on the website. It's under the tragedy tab, and then there's a sub tab called the love of money, and I've drilled down the money on that tab, and it's sickening. With Grace, if Grace would have made it out of the hospital alive, they would have received very little money. By having Grace die and labeling the death COVID, they received a $13,000 bonus. How do you get a bonus for death? Shouldn't the bonus be for life? I mean, it makes no sense what's going on here. And drilling it down to Grace's last day, the hospital was at maximum capacity. I found all of these statistics online the morning I did that research. And when you look at it, you'll see, man, I mean, there's 40 hours of research that God got in my hands in about 5 hours. And
Wow.
we found out that not only was the hospital at maximum capacity, but the patients in the emergency room were stacked up like cordwood. So, I mean, it was, this is all speculation at this point that they did it for that reason, but they were only making $1,680 a day on Grace. The average COVID patient, just the bonuses are 100 grand. So, I mean, Grace was way on the left hand side of the bell curve with what the hospital was making. So they're at max capacity. There's people stacked up like cordwood. If you're purely motivated by money, it's pretty easy to take Grace out. And I told you already, they had referenced she had Down syndrome 36 different times. 67% of Down syndrome children are already aborted before they're ever born. They referenced that Grace was unvaccinated, that we're following the frontline doctors' misinformation campaign, that we're Christians. So there's was such a bias towards Grace in our family that again, that's fact. I mean, what I'm telling you is fact. And
Oh, yeah.
so is that why they took her out? I mean, that's speculation, and we don't know why. Only God knows why.
Sure. I just want to take an extremely quick sidestep here and just say that, for anyone who's ever been blessed with knowing or being related to a person with Down syndrome, can tell the world that they are truly gifts from God. And Grace clearly was a gift from God for sure. No question about it. Tell me, Scott, what's next? What you have the website, which is amazinggrace.com. Is that correct? I'm sorry. Our
Oh,
Amazing Grace.
ouramazinggrace.net.
Thank you.
Yeah.
.net.
So
Thank
what's
you.
next? Yeah. So you're asked what's next. Well, first, why are we doing this? We're doing this to get the word out, of course. We don't want other people to die. More importantly, we're hoping that this pricks people's hearts and to see that our government is not your friend. They have duped you. And so if you hear this for the first time, you think, oh my gosh, that's God potentially pricking your heart to call you to him. And if that happens to you, pray. He will lead you to the only one who will never dupe you, which is his son, Jesus Christ. So that's what we're hoping for, that this story can be used by God to help lead people to him. So is there going to be a lawsuit? We don't know. I mean, I've long thought there will be a justice phase of this campaign. And if there is, the door's got to be open. Multiple doors have opened toward that end right now. Tom Renz is involved. I mean, it could happen. If it does, we're not going to take any money. That's not the goal here. I don't want any money. Personally, I would just like to see Grace's death certificate changed to the truth versus a COVID death. So that would be a nice thing to happen. But if there's a lawsuit, the purpose would be to get this to stop. This is no good. What's happening? We envision then there will be a foundation that will be, Cindy, I, and Jess will run, for as long as we can to help other kids do the cool things that Grace got to do. So that's where we see it going long term.
You're an amazing family, and what you're doing in honor of Grace and her legacy and making it so that her death was not in vain is incredible. And I hope that you'll keep us posted if there are any developments in that way. If there's anything we can help with, we would love to help get your message out as much as we possibly humanly can. So I do hope you'll keep in touch with us on that.
Well, thank you very much. We have a memorial rally tomorrow. So if anybody can hear
Okay.
this and get to the memorial rally in Appleton, Wisconsin from 9 to
Appleton.
noon, it's right near St. Elizabeth's Hospital where Grace was killed.
Perfect. Perfect. Yes, everyone get out there. If you need more information, go over to ouramazinggrace.net. And Scott, I can't thank you enough for coming on the show and sharing Grace's story and your story with us. And we keep you in our thoughts and in our prayers, of course. And thank you.
Well, thank you, Elsa.
Thank you. All right, guys, this has been the Elsa Kurt Show. Thank you so much for watching, and we will see you next week. Take care.